Infrastructure is crumbling and the problems are only getting worse. The pressure to find solutions is hot. Let's talk about why American cities have no water, no electricity, and no money to fix their infrastructure problems. Welcome to the Infrastructure Hot Seat Podcast, hosted by Chad Smeltzer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Network. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I am your host. Today's guest is Ryan Mast, who is the Infrastructure Partner and Senior Advisor at Sustainability Partners. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me here today.
Ryan, I was looking at your experience, and back it looked like you were a part of the federal government at some point in time with FEMA. How did you get into infrastructure, and what were you doing at FEMA?
Yeah, it's been sort of an interesting, jagged journey. I did not, I don't think, grow up in high school or even in college thinking, I'm going to go work for the federal government or even FEMA in that sense. In fact, 25 years ago, FEMA as an agency and then just the emergency management field, I think in general, was still very much in the development thing. I think it's a lot more professional these days. Over time as it's become more important and there's just been a need for a more advanced workforce in it. But I came to it actually via international development and a desire to get into and I guess move back abroad to Latin America. So
Okay.
I had after I finished my undergraduate degree, I joined the Peace Corps, and so went and served in the Peace Corps in Guatemala. And finishing up there, I had the goal of coming back, getting a little more education, a little more expertise in international development specific to Latin America. And so as part of that, I joined a program at the Stone Center for Latin American Studies at Tulane University.
Okay.
And so moved to New Orleans just a few days ahead of Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, wow.
And so it kind of really found me. So that really changed the course of so many people in Louisiana and in the South. But for me in particular, after I finished up my graduate degree, there was so much to do still in the place that I lived and grew to love.
Yeah.
And so, found a position open with FEMA and got involved in that. And really, ever since, just loved it, like really enjoyed the emergency management field, really enjoyed all of the complexities that it's grown to be, not just on the recovery side, but also on just the resilience and sustainability aspects of it, looking at comprehensive risk management from both a natural disaster and sort of climate change perspective.
Interesting. So you were you got to see Katrina's damage firsthand. It sounded like you were a part of it. Like you were in the trenches, like helping out. How did that all happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I was there. I mean, honestly, like I still recall the moment where I was in the library getting prepared for classes to start the following week,
Yeah.
and over the loudspeaker there was a statement, something to the effect of, the library will remain open at regular hours today, but all staff please begin for hurricane preparations. And my thought was, what are hurricane preparations? Like, what does that look like? So I called the only friend I knew in the entire city at that point, and was kind of like, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, oh, you just kind of pack a bag, leave, be prepared to leave for a few days, and then we'll be back in the city. And of course, that was not the case.
Wow.
So my journey back took a couple months. I was part of that evacuation group
Okay.
that left. First stop was in Memphis, where I stayed with my sister for about a week, I believe. I was helping set up shelters in northern Mississippi for other survivors who were evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
Then kind of just found places and couches to sleep on until the city opened back up.
Oh, wow.
And just kind of did work on recovery and cleanup until the school started back up. So I wasn't part of the sort of official response, but
Right.
everybody that worked or lived around there was doing something for many years following that.
So that kind of inspired you to join FEMA. It sounds like, right? That's
it played a key factor in it, right? Like
Yeah.
in terms of like, I didn't know what scope or scale of a recovery was going to be needed, but obviously this was much different than anybody had ever experienced before, and it still
Right.
to this day remains the largest natural disaster that the U.S. has had to recover from. And so there was just so many opportunities to kind of figure out what your place was or could be in that. And so, being able to become part of that large recovery effort and then really sustain it over time and turn it into a career was really, for me, very meaningful.
Yeah. That had to be. How many years did you? I was going to say it had to be like a not an amazing experience, but a very um, how would you say it? I'm trying to figure out the right word. Like kind of dramatic in a sense, because you're like seeing all this stuff. I would assume, with all the city, all the damage and stuff that was left behind that, and then you're in FEMA. And when you're in FEMA, you stayed there for what, 7 years or something like that?
I was with the agency for a little over 8 years, and that was sort of at the the pinnacle of what we would sort of categorize as the long-term recovery aspects of it, right?
Okay.
So a lot of the major projects were going on at that point, and then moving them through the grant process, moving them into construction, and then the management, and then the actual ribbon cutting, right? So you got to
Yeah, yeah.
see that
So
whole
that,
process of like, hey, this is where we're starting from, and this is how rebuilding is actually occurring over time, and how and a disaster like that in New Orleans, which was so significant because every major system was impacted. Every
yeah,
major infrastructure system was impacted. The entire school district, the entire wastewater system, the entire drinking water system, all of the levee protection that was provided there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so
yeah,
every system had to be rebuilt.
that's a lot. So, when you were there, were you helping push the grants and get the construction, get the infrastructure built? And is that what your role was there?
So I played a couple different roles over that time. I started out in the grant program, in the hazard mitigation grant program. So
Okay.
that was on the, I was doing project review for that, as well as support for NEPA compliance, and really trying to move forward with approvals of grant applications at that point. After that, I spent a lot of time working on the sort of policy slash intergovernmental relations aspects of things, which was for me really exciting because then you get to engage in all of different programs that are going on. You kind of get to step back and see not just how all the programs are working within the community, but actually serve as a problem solver, right? Like
Right.
you're essentially a liaison between the community leaders, political leaders, elected officials, et cetera,
Right.
and the agency trying to problem solve.
Right. Yeah, that's got to be a lot of good experience for kind of what you're moving into, which we're going to get into soon. Uh, but in between there, after you left FEMA, you were working for Albuquerque at some point in time, correct?
Yeah, so I moved on from FEMA, and sort of the role then was kind of diminishing, right? Like so they're diminishing. Like you sort of go through this cycle, and not to say that there wasn't still a lot of work to be done, but that was more of the closeout process. And so my role, kind of became one that would have been absorbed back into just normal business, and so from there, I really got interested in that aspect of risk reduction. Like, how do we actually, um, help to ensure that something like this, at least the impacts of something like this, won't happen again. And so I accepted a job over at the city of New Orleans um, to lead their hazard mitigation department, which
Okay.
was or division within the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. And so in that, it was kind of interesting because now you're closer to the projects. Now you're closer to the strategy moving forward. And it's not just FEMA funding, but it's like general risk management continuum, right? All
Right.
the risk transfer aspects of it. How does this influence with insurance? How does this insurance with credit ratings? How does this insurance with individual homeowners policies, et cetera? But in a very specific area. And so that was just a phenomenal opportunity to be there because at the time, New Orleans was still, and maybe to this day, still sort of the epicenter for innovation around recovery and resilience, right? Like this
Yeah.
is, you're part of all these major networks. And in that, you get exposed to all of these different ideas. You get exposed to all these different concepts, primarily, and initially out of necessity, but then because like this is just best practice. This is where the industry and the field is moving. So let's put it into practice in your neighborhood.
Yeah. What when doing risk analysis, how does that work? Can you explain that to like the audience so they kind of understand? Or risk
Yeah, I
assessment.
mean,
You kind of mentioned that, so I was trying to figure that
yeah.
out.
So for me, you're constantly trying to figure out how, and in this case, generally we're talking about the built environment, right?
Yeah.
So there's again, this can start to scale out from there, and certainly took a look at more and more of that. But if we look at the built environment, and you look at infrastructure, and in this case, public infrastructure, what you're trying to determine is like, rather than approaching this from a static perspective in terms of like, this is the design standard, this is what it needs to be, this is how we move it forward. Look at it from a sort of a a futuristic sort of
Yeah.
mentality in terms of
Yeah.
like, what does this need to be? How are we adapting and mitigating for future conditions, not what we're building for now? And then what are the benefits, and or how do we actually get to that point? Because I think the one of the challenges becomes of that is like, well, listen, if we could build everything to just bigger and better, we would. But like, obviously there's a balance you have to create within that, with how
Right.
much you can pay for and what's constructible and et
Right.
cetera on that. So you're trying to find that balance of like, well, listen, this is where we can harden this facility to do it this way. This is where we can increase capacity in this. And also, let's look at all the different benefits that a community will achieve through that over time, and including financial benefits over time, so that this then becomes, and you can actually align that to a sustainable funding and financing structure. I
Got
know
it.
that gets a little abstract there, but like, you're basically saying, how can I build this stronger? What do I need to ensure, because I can't build it stronger, but we still need some sort of financial protection? And then like, maybe this is something we shouldn't be building here, right? Maybe
Right.
we should be moving this and putting it somewhere else,
Right.
or maybe we should let somebody else own this. We'll just receive the service from it so that they own that risk.
Right. That's perfect, because that kind of gave me a better insight to like kind of like what you were doing. Because if we build these buildings in certain in infrastructure in general, and in places it shouldn't be built, obviously there's high risk. There's going to be higher insurance, higher costs, right? I mean, that's really what we're getting at. And then if you build it too much, let's say you build it too expensive, you put too much materials that are too strong, and Cat 5 wouldn't damage it at all, right? You wouldn't need as much insurance potentially because it's less risk, but also you spent so much money building the infrastructure that you didn't really need anyway, because it was never going to get any damage to it, or whatever. I'm just kind of looking at it a different perspective of it, but that's very interesting, because if communities are doing that, that's a fine line of balance of financial risk versus reward, so to speak. Does that make any sense? The kind of the way I'm throwing at you.
No, you're exactly right on
Okay.
that.
I
And
was
then
curious. I'm
also,
drinking. Mike.
no, but that's the thinking in that. And then I would just add to the one component of that is like, also, what are the other benefits that we don't traditionally think of in our benefit cost analysis as to whether or not we should do this? Like, a
Right.
lot of times it gets thought of as like, we go as far as, well, how much does it cost, right? How
Right.
much does it, what we're building right now, cost?
Right.
And is that viable or not? But the reality is, a different way to approach it, the way I like to approach it, is like, how much does it cost now, but how much is it going to also cost you to operate over time,
Right.
right? Like, because if you build better now, it'll be cheaper over time to operate sometimes, but you have to do that analysis. But also, like, if you can decrease interruption of services for infrastructure,
Right.
then you have all these other tangible benefits that really should be accounted for, that, such as, if when a disaster strikes, the ability for a community to recover faster. Well, the faster you can recover, there's a very tangible dollar value and livelihood and quality of life value to
Right.
that, including health impacts to that. And so what you're trying to figure out is, how do we, as a community, how can we absorb a blow, whether that's a short-term blow like a hurricane, or a long-term blow such as increasing sea level rise, right?
Right.
But also prosper in that process, right? What are all the benefits that we can attribute to doing this thing? this
Right.
thing being building this infrastructure here. And it becomes complicated, but for me it's like fascinating and just like an amazing conversation to have with community, because what you're doing is you're really re-envisioning how we design our infrastructure systems.
Right. And a lot of what we're doing now, and I'm going to kind of relate to my procurement experience in building infrastructure, what I've done with local governments is, if you don't put in the right investment up front, right, you stand the possibility of it failing quicker, which would degrade the economic sustainability of the community, right? As you put more infrastructure in and it fails faster. So there's a lot of due diligence that needs to happen in your process. It sounds like when you're going to build these pieces of infrastructure in these communities. Does that kind of make sense? The way I'm kind of describing it, because economic sustainability is what drives all
Yeah.
cities. So,
Economic sustainability is important. Quality of life factors that go along with
yep.
that improve then health, mental health, et cetera. Um, and then what you start to see is then when you do that well, then you start to see growth, and you start to see growth in all these areas that you wouldn't even account for, but that have a tangible value to the community.
Right.
And ultimately, in my view has always been, as a public servant or somebody who is working on infrastructure that then is also a service to the public, is like what we're really trying to do is enable the community to thrive,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're doing. We're not just delivering water, we're not just treating sewage, we're not just providing electricity, whatever it might be, right? All the things, providing transportation and public transit, et cetera. What we're trying to do is we're trying to enable the community to thrive.
Yeah.
And you're in a risky environment or risk prone environment, like the way that you have to approach that is going to change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting, because some of the cities in America thrive, some do not, and they really lose. It kind of, in my mind, it spirals out of control, because as you start to lose that community, the infrastructure, things start going down. You lose tax base, and then you get in worse shape. You're just trying to recover and get out of it, and try and figure out how to rebound. Rebound economically and infrastructurally, and it seems like
Right.
it's almost impossible if you don't have done the due diligence with the risk analysis up front, and really. But a lot of that change with politics and everything else too. That's a whole nother conversation that we
Yeah.
that we could probably get into. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is complicated. And I would say that, one of the sort of, I think, core ideas that I bring from working in emergency management, because I still kind of consider myself at heart, I'm an emergency manager,
Yeah.
right? Titles can be what they are, but that's really, I think, all that formative years that I had professionally, like that I'm still like geared that way.
Yeah.
And at its core, emergency management is really an interdepartmental coordination effort, right? Even the way it's designed in an emergency operations center, you have all your emergency support functions, and they're all looking towards a singular task, right? Of like,
Mhm.
we're addressing this threat that's in front of us, but we have different responsibilities within it. But in the near term, it's really sort of a orchestrated, like, sort of performance, right? Of
Yeah.
like, everybody is playing their role in it and figuring out how they can contribute to the better good of this. Unfortunately, when things are not in an emergency situation, we kind of fall back into our little silos and
Habits, silos.
sort
Yeah.
of resist engaging with other departments, resist engaging with other outside thoughts on this, because that's not the way we traditionally do business. Like, there's nothing forcing us to have to do that.
Yeah.
But in the resilience and sustainability world, it sort of is a continuum of that. Well, let's figure out how we can achieve mutual benefits by doing a little bit stronger coordination.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're spot on with that stuff. I mean, and that's the most important part, is bringing sustainability to the communities that we live, and just thriving and growing, which we've been talking about. When you're looking at climate change these days, has that really made a big difference in the risk analysis?
Yeah, I mean, it has, because we have to think about things in a much different manner. I think that I say traditionally speaking, or maybe historically speaking, however you want to look at it, um, you know, there's not, communities, and you can define community how you want to. don't tend to do a high level of change or high level of new direction and where they're going with their systems,
Yeah.
unless there's a major shock, right? Unless something forced them to think about something different.
Yeah.
But climate change is kind of like, a very slow river rise, right? It's like incremental over time, and you can kind of get, um, I would say, complacent in
Right.
thinking that, like, well, yeah, this is a pending threat or a future threat, but like that's okay. We'll get our design standards right by that time. But like the reality is, you need to be thinking about that on the front side. Like it's like you need to be thinking about what is the benchmark is 50 years from now. Let's say, just put a mark in the
Right.
sand. You need to be designing things for that now, because your infrastructure systems, many of those components are going to be 50
Oh
years or
man.
longer if you do it
Yeah.
right. Right. So like you have to really start to advance that thinking. That
You're spot on. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I had
no, yeah.
this experience I wanted to share because it was when one of the cities in the Midwest. I'm not going to call anybody out, but what was happening is the engineering firm was undersizing using 20, 30-year-old specs.
Hmm.
And they were undersizing the stormwater systems dramatically because they didn't plan for that 30, 40 years ago
Right.
when they were writing these specs, right? So they're using old specs, bringing them into new designs and planning, and they're putting in 12-inch storm systems when they should have been probably 24 or 36. I mean, now we're
Right.
talking about 50, 100-year-old rain storms
Right.
that are happening every 5 years, stuff like
Right.
that. So we've dramatically undersized. And I think this is what's happened over the years. You see the infrastructure gap, you see how far we are behind with infrastructure crumbling, things like that. And all the flooding has happened because we've been using some of the old specifications, things like that have been just sitting there. And I'm just curious, do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, well, I mean that's a wonderful example
Yeah.
of something that
Right.
happens so often, and it's really just about trying to think about that from multiple perspectives. Like, what do we need to design for, and noting that, like, listen, if we're going to do this one time, let's go ahead and overcompensate now, because it's probably going to be cheaper, more cost effective now to do it, and then you're going to have the benefits for that entire time, right?
Yeah.
The other thing to ask is like the community is going to benefit from that, right? So if you put that 36-inch main in now over a 16-inch, right?
Right.
Whatever it is, right? You increase that design standard, and then all of a sudden that 1% storm happens, and you've prevented flooding. You have saved millions of dollars, right? And you have
Yep.
saved a lot of frustration, and you may have saved lives,
Yeah.
right? And like and so to go ahead and build our infrastructure, the systems we need to have, and you can do this on lots of things, and it's complicated because you still have to kind of do that analysis, and this is where I love asset management, like, and
Yeah.
all those tools that are out there now to kind of help planners and utility managers, et cetera, think through this. Is like, where do we need to start? Like, where are our highest risk areas? How do we maintain that? How we manage that? And
Right.
it's also why I think AI and some of these other tools, like smart water meters, for example, are really helpful, right? Because they can give you that, not just that data now to kind of help track over time of what's going on in your system, but also start to highlight like where are the danger points, right? So you can
Right.
start to really prioritize your resources as a community.
Yeah, no, it's great points. And that's where we're going to pivot into infrastructure as a service, which you are currently involved in with Sustainability Partners, which is a great transition from what we've been talking about. Because as I'm thinking about this, my perception of infrastructure as a service, just from talking to you previously in a couple conversations, I didn't know much about. I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? People are just build an infrastructure, and it's someone like who maintains it after that. But now what I'm learning from you, and you're going to explain it obviously to us, but that's how I kind of interpret it. Was like, okay, we build infrastructure and then we hand it over to somebody to manage it or something like that. So can you elaborate on how your programs work at Sustainability Partners?
Sure. Yeah. And, I just think it's a really, great model. It's one that, I was exposed to in New Orleans initially when we
Yeah.
were kind of thinking through all these different structures. And so feel really fortunate to have had that opportunity to kind of learn about these different methods and models that are out there, that just like anything out there, and in terms of and technology and construction materials, these are advancing techniques, right? These are new new tools that are coming to the market for the benefit of public entities. So with sustainability partners, infrastructure as a service is really meant to help alleviate some of those challenges and barriers that communities face when they're trying to deliver essential infrastructure for their communities, but like our systems haven't quite caught up with all of that, right? There's gaps and barriers within it. So if you think about funding and financing structures for how you get any of your public infrastructure done, they tend to be static and in some cases complex, right? There's a unique way of having to navigate this process or this grant application, et cetera. But what they're also doing is you're putting forward a project, this project to build it to this design standard to this thing, but like not really accounting all the time for, well, how are you going to maintain that to achieve that designed useful life? How are you going to actually improve it over time to adapt to actual conditions in it, right? You're putting in something and it's going to stay fixed. So infrastructure as a service is meant to really address some of those infrastructure cycles that cause deteriorating systems in communities. So the first thing is it helps to alleviate that sort of upfront capital shortage, right? Of like, hey, I'd like to do this, but I need cost share. Or, hey, I'd like to do this, but I value engineered all the value out of this project because I don't have enough money, whatever. We are a both a capital provider, but also a capacity provider to help to address all of the needs that the capital needs that are necessary to actually deliver essential infrastructure to a community. And so what we also prioritize is robust engineering and design standards along that. Like, let's build this the most robust way you can to achieve not only the most the best useful life out of that, but also to achieve the most utility for you, right? So how to build put in, so for example, water meters is a great example of this. Like, as opposed to just a mechanical water meter that goes in that may fail after 10 years, may fail after 15 years, et cetera. So then you stop getting not just the data you need to bill properly, but also the data you need to know if there's a leak in your system.
Right.
We prioritize and we really focus on trying to get smart water meters out there that are ultrasonic, that have no moving parts, but that also can do acoustic leak detection within the system, right? So then you're actually like more reliable over time. And then we partner with the community to stay, to keep that infrastructure maintained over time and upgrade it, by the way, right? As well, because conditions will change, technology will change on that. And the way that we do that is to convert all the infrastructure into essentially a sustainable utility. So, we bring together and package the capital necessary to deliver on that. And then we convert that into a usage-based model, just like you would, a regular utility, whether it's electric utility. And so then the community is just paying for usage of that stuff, right, of the infrastructure on it, but they have full rights to use and operate all of that all along the way.
So from what I'm understanding is using the water meters as a way of a community was like, okay, well, we don't have the funding to make smart meters a real thing. Sustainability partners would be able to work with the community, obviously, and install those meters. And then is there profit sharing? Like, how's the distribution? Like, how's that work for these communities then once they're installed?
Yeah. So what we would do is we would ensure that there's all the capital that's needed to get those installed. We would, work through procurement to get the right vendor to get them installed properly. We would get the community trained on how to use the system and how to maximize that for both the water conservation purposes, but also for their financial purposes. And then we would partner with them. But the way that our model works is we are accounting for all the costs that are needed to both install and maintain that system over time.
The whole
Right?
system.
And then we convert that into basically a usage fee. And so for us, we're only interested in, the stuff itself and ensuring that it's maintained over time. But we know that by having that system in place, that the community itself is going to achieve a lot of benefits from that, from very accurate reporting and then as such billing for their water meter, so that essentially you've got a very accurate cash register for your water system on that.
Yeah.
If you want to do an AMI system, you don't have to go out and do meter reads, right? So you're reducing staff costs for that. You're going to have acoustic leak detection, so hopefully advancing your ability to address small leaks before they can become major leaks, which is a cost saver. And then over time, as we're accounting for the maintenance, you're not going to have to replace those after 5-10 years. We're going to be responsible for ensuring that service is delivered over time. So you have that predictability within it. Any of those other achievements, those financial benefits to the community keeps, right? Like it's not a revenue sharing kind of model so much as it is we're just ensuring that the infrastructure itself is there and reliable so that the community can then achieve those themselves.
Got it. That's very helpful, because I can only imagine that there's a lot of cities, communities that are smaller, or maybe even bigger, that just don't have the funding to put these smart meters in, and they got a lot of leaks in their system, and they got a lot of,
right.
I wouldn't say a lot of, but a lack of data, that they just don't know what they don't know, right? It's kind of
right.
That's the way the water systems are in America right now. There's tons of leaks and nobody knows where they are until they come out of the ground, or someone actually sees them coming out of the ground, right? I mean, that's typically how it works. So if people wanted to learn more about this, Ryan, how would they get a hold of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I'm available. I try to stay pretty active on LinkedIn, so folks can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. Ryan Mast. I'm in New Mexico now, and so do most of my work out here. You can contact me by email at rmast@s.partners. I encourage everybody to check out our website as well, which is just sustainability.partners. And just kind of learn a little bit more about not just, what we're doing and how we're trying to make a difference, but also just our really amazing team that's doing wonderful work across the country right now to try and really energize and innovate in this space.
Love it, Ryan. Thank you for what you've done and what you're doing now, because infrastructure needs it, and we need more people like you that are out there helping and making a big difference in our communities. But again, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, we work on a variety of asset classes. The model is very useful across the board, but our whole vision is just to try and to help provide reliable and safe infrastructure across. And at this stage, I think we need a lot of voices to help encourage that for communities everywhere. And so I appreciate the opportunity to join you today, and just for, I appreciate the messages that you're getting out about this. I think it's just really critical to us in the industry.
Well, thanks, man. Appreciate that. And you have a great rest of the week, and I'm sure we'll have another conversation another day and another time.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you for listening to the Infrastructure Hot Seat podcast. We hope that this show brought you some insight on relevant topics within the infrastructure world. Please join us every 2 weeks on Tuesday for the next episode. If you're interested in being a guest on this podcast, please set up a 15-minute interview with your host at calendly.com/Chad Smeltzer.